Yeah, I'm sure we could do that. I think it was meeting and now there's probably the three greatest experts who are in right at the moment on Palestine. I'll be very pleased to take any questions. Anybody? Might have gone to you. Right, who would you like to for the general question?
Hi, my name is Peter Gregson, I'm from Edinburgh.
I'm interested, obviously I'm in the Labour Party, I've been suspended from my pains, but all three of you advocated a single state solution. Would that be right? Did you say that as well, Tom? Is that right? All three. And obviously the Labour Party is still hooked up on this two-state solution, as indeed is Netanyahu, as indeed is the Palestinian Authority. Everyone's talking about the two-state solution, but of course nobody's saying how big it is. So two-state solution might be, a square kilometre in Gaza versus, the rest go along into the Zionists. So the two-state solution obviously is something they want to keep going forever, and they will keep going forever. And you guys, I think, same as me, agree that a single-state solution is the only viable one. How do we turn this ship around? How do we get the Labour Party and all the politicians all around the world to move from the two-state to the one-state? That's the challenge, I think.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
My opinion is we hear a campaign rhetoric these days about annexing part of the West Bank. Now, there's a reason why the Israeli government has not already just admitted the truth that it has long ago annexed the West Bank. And the reason is because as long as there is this ghost entity called the Palestinian Authority, that is the alleged representative of the Palestinians, it can explain why, if you're not Jewish and you're in the West Bank, you can't vote in the elections. Well, you have your own government, you vote in their elections. Now, this, of course, is all make-believe. It's all smoke and mirrors. The reason why Israel has not come out and admitted that it annexed the West Bank many years ago is because then it would have to explain why non-Jews cannot vote in its election. Now, as the pressure of the more extreme elements pushes to come and just get it over with and say, yes, we annexed it the way we annexed East Jerusalem and the Golan Heights, then it's going to be too late. Then they will not be able to explain why, if you're not Jewish, you can't vote. It's already, of course, the case in East Jerusalem. Now, according to Israel, East Jerusalem is as much Israel as any place else, but if you're not Jewish, you are a resident. You're not a citizen, and you cannot vote in the national elections. But somehow they get away with it in this little area. If once they annex the West Bank, then the pretense will be over. It will be obviously one state.
I don't usually advocate any solution. What I usually say is that we cannot think of the future so long as there is Zionism. It's just like apartheid in South Africa. The South Africans could not have moved forward without dismantling apartheid. The same thing with Zionism. I don't know how the future will look. I mean, it's really difficult to know. But Palestine was never a state on its own any time in history. Palestine was always part of a much bigger region. Now, who rules that region, who ruled it in the past, who is likely to rule it in the future, we don't know. What we know is that there can be peace, there can be justice, there can be prosperity if there are equal rights for the people living in that part of the world. That part of the world may eventually be much bigger than what we think of today in terms of territorialism. I mean, look at my families, the Tamimis, for instance. We are all over the place, from Tunisia all over to the Gulf. This was once one entity. It was divided and fragmented by colonial powers. All the borders that exist today among the various entities in the region are artificial borders. They are lines in the desert. I don't recognize the legitimacy of any of them. And that's why I avoid talking about a one-state or a two-state solution. I'd rather talk about an end to racism, and then let's build the future together.
Well, I think the reason that the Labour Party and others still talk about two-state solution is because that is their way of saying something without having to do anything. Because there is no possibility, let's say this two-state solution was viable, you need two states, right, to agree on it. Well, the state of Israel doesn't agree. The state of Israel has taken it all, so it's all Israel. And there is no state on the other side. There's nobody on the other side that could be the other state. So, but that's, for most people, that's too many details. So we support the Palestinian state and we recognize the Palestinian state and we believe in the two-state solution. And when these people go to Palestine, they only go to Ramallah and Hebron and Bethlehem and, you know what I mean? They never go to the Negev Desert. You know, hundreds of thousands of Palestinians in the Negev Desert live in towns with no electricity, no water, no access to roads, nothing. Hundreds of thousands and they're Israeli citizens. They never go there, you know. It's an easy thing to do. It's like, okay, we've got this mantra that we can keep repeating and we can pretend that we care and we can pass all these resolutions. But the only way to actually, the only action that is available to us, to them, is to impose, to adopt BDS and to start imposing sanctions and to boycott and divest from the state of Israel, which will really be the demise of Zionism, which is what we're talking about. We're talking about justice for everyone, we're talking about equality, we're talking about the end of racism. But they don't want to do that because they don't want to say that. That's exactly the issue. So I think it's important when they do come up with these resolutions, when they have all these great meetings where they talk about, you know, I visited Palestine and I visited Israel. What does that mean? I visited Palestine and I visited Israel. I visited the occupied Palestinian territories. Are there Palestinian territories somewhere that are not occupied? Because that qualifies as though there's some part of Palestine that's not occupied. What does that mean? So I think we need to push them and say, well, can you please explain to me, how is Ramallah different from the Negev Desert, from the Palestinians in the Negev Desert, and how is it different? You know what I mean? It's all this illusion that they're quite happy to keep repeating and keep perpetuating until they're forced to do otherwise. And it's our job to force them to do otherwise.
Thanks, Miko. I think part of your answer is it's not good, it's very unlikely to come from the inside. It's got to, as Miko just said, it's got to come from pressure on the outside. With enough pressure on the outside, we can convince enough people on the inside to get with the message, and then we can have a sort of a pincer attack on equality throughout Israel-Palestine. Chris, did you want a question?
I'll take the microphone over there.
Oh, sorry.
Right. I just wanted to ask, and again, apologies if that question has been asked, but it was something a burning question for me because it's just something that's just currently happening. I wanted to ask the panel's opinion on current events, the fact that Netanyahu might be out of politics, you know, at least for the time being, he could be. The fact that there's the Palestinian minority in Israel clubbed together, got themselves the joint list, is recommending, you know, becoming the official opposition, recommending Gantz to lead or to form a government, and how what's that going to be in the background of this so-called deal of the century? Where do you think that there's an impact there? I mean, do you think? I mean, I don't know if Gantz owes any. I mean, I know that surely there's some sort of some sort of dealings going on, some sort of promises to soften the stance. I know there was some article thinking that they're basically not expecting him to be an angel, but as long as he's not a clone of Netanyahu. So there are some expectations from the Palestinian minority within the Israeli state. So what do you think? I mean, I don't know if that's already been covered. If it hasn't, would you mind? And apologies if I'm jumping in.
It hasn't, in fact. Do you want me to start? I can start this time. Like I said earlier, the Israeli elections took place, but do I need this as well? Yeah. Okay. I thought this was the camera. Okay. All right. Well, the Israeli elections took place, but there are 5 million people who are governed by Israel who did not participate. right? 2.3 million people in Gaza, and some 3 million people who live in what used to be the West Bank and now is called Judea and Samaria. They are not citizens of anything, and so they did not get to vote in anything. The Palestinians who are citizens of Israel, who, like I said, also is the last remnant of the pre-1967 reality, they voted for, and they have this joint list. Now, Palestinians have always had a presence in the Israeli Knesset, and it's always been around that number, sometimes 10, sometimes 12, now it's a little bit more, 13. But they could have double that number, and still they would be completely ignored, because no Zionist government will ever allow them to participate in a coalition, and it's humiliating for them to even rely on their votes in any resolution. So their existence there is symbolic at best. They ended up recommending, not all of them though, Peled, which is a part of that, refused to participate in recommending Gantz. And the Gantz people actually called and wrote to the joint list, said, thank you, but no thank you. We do not want you. We do not want your recommendation. Because that would be humiliating to have their recommendation of Arabs. And so in terms of the rights of the Palestinians, in terms of where this is none of this is relevant at all. None of it could be Gantz, it could be Netanyahu, it makes absolutely no difference. Their policies are the same, their ideology is the same. Gantz looks maybe a little more handsome than Netanyahu, and he's not Netanyahu, and that's the only thing that's different. You know what I mean? And I doubt that he's got the skill to end up being prime minister. I think Netanyahu is probably going to end up being the prime minister anyway. But either way, it's gossip. In terms of the actual issues, in terms of the injustice, in terms of the apartheid regime, it makes absolutely no difference whatsoever. Anybody else? No? You're good?
Going back to this working towards a two-state solution, people have to realize it's a fig leaf for timid Labour politicians to hide behind. There can't be a two-state solution. It's gone. It's in the past. What I'd like to say is, what did the panel think of Jeremy Corbyn? To me, is like a rabbit caught in the headlights. And he's come out with this statement saying Zionists and anti-Zionists are both welcome in the Labour Party. And I looked at this at face value and I thought, that's a contradiction in terms. And I thought about it overnight. He's actually done me a favour, Jeremy Corbyn, because Tony Blair has been on television and he's a self-proclaimed Zionist. Tom Watson, self-proclaimed Zionist. Tom Robinson, self-proclaimed Zionist. So if them three individuals are self-proclaiming that they are Zionists, then that makes me an anti-Zionist. And I'm welcome in the Labour Party, until you start showing solidarity to the wrong people. And then you're expelled. Thank you.
I mentioned this to two members of the panel. I go to Palestine with friends quite regularly now, and which is great because we feel we're supporting them in a very practical way rather than being sort of tourists looking at the horror. And I get a lot of different variety of views from various Palestinians who, I mean, I think we've maybe fall into the trap of thinking all Palestinians are thinking the same. And you get a variety of people who have shut down basically and just get on with their lives, however circumscribed they are, to those who are active. I mean, we have a lot of contact with Nablus University, and if you didn't really know the situation, you could, most of the time, think actually life wasn't too bad, because they're sort of living in a sort of a bubble. It's when you want to go out of the town or do anything else and you realise, or get a job or do anything else, you realise how complex it is and how difficult it is for them. And I don't know what other people felt, but I thought Dr. Tamimi was really quite hopeful, and the idea that something appalling like Zionism can't last forever. And whereas I thought Miko was more pessimistic, and I just want to know if Dr. Tamimi, when will this finish? I know you can't give us a timeline maybe, but it's gone on for so many years. I mean, I remember my father went to Israel in the 60s and he came back and he said he'd lived in the 30s in Germany as a teacher, and he said, they're just like Nazis. He said, I was pushed off the streets in Tel Aviv. He said, they just remind me of the Nazis. Now, he came back in the 60s telling me that, and I didn't know really what he was talking about till later. And, you know, we do an awful lot of work here in Brighton. We're very active, but sometimes you think, oh, please, God, will someone tell me when and how this will end? And I know you probably haven't got maybe not the answer to this, but if you could somehow say the conditions in which it might end.
Let's try and remember the conditions in which this began, because that will help us imagine the conditions in which it will come to an end. Without the international developments that paved the way for the creation of a Zionist entity in Palestine, that entity could not have come into existence. When the Arabs were so divided, backward, colonized, and when Europe had the will to do to its Jewish communities what it did, all these factors came together. The collapse of the Ottoman Empire, which was the power joining all those parts of the Middle East together. Now today we are witnessing a revival in the region, and that revival is essential for the eventual emancipation of the Palestinians as well as of the Arabs as a whole. Israel has lasted so long not just because of American support or because of the support of certain Zionists and communities around the world, but also because of the Arab dictators who rule the region, who suppress their populations, who violate their human rights. Israel would not have been able to make peace with Egypt, with Jordan, with the PLO, or today invade the Gulf region without the Arab peoples of those countries having been shackled by their dictators. And we see signs of this changing, the Arab Spring or the Arab revolutions, which have been suppressed, but I'm glad to see signs of a revival, as we are seeing in Egypt today, as we've just seen in Algeria, in Sudan, and we might see in other places. When I saw Zain al-Abidin Ben Ali in Tunisia fall, then Mubarak in Egypt fall, then Gaddafi in Libya, Ali Abdullah Saleh in Yemen, I imagined my way back to Hebron was being paved, because because these are the real obstacles. These are the real obstacles that are preventing the return of the Palestinians to their homeland by means of providing Israel with security, with support, with collaboration. And I regret to say, I mean, some of the things you described in the West Bank, that's because of our PLO, our National Liberation Movement, was turned into a collaborating agency with the occupation as a result of Oslo. So actually what enabled Israel to continue thus far also was Oslo and the authority created by Oslo, which provides Israel with protection within the West Bank, and prior to that, even including inside the Gaza Strip. So I am optimistic because I can see change, I can see awareness, I can see a revival in the entire region, and that revival will pave the way for the hopefully peaceful dismantling of the Zionist entity, as our brothers and comrades in Naturi Karta keep saying and hoping for.
I have to say, this is the first time, usually people tell me that I sound very hopeful, so something must have changed in my message. I think that, I think the peaceful dismantlement of Zionism is probably much closer than most people think. For several reasons. I think that when you travel across Palestine and you talk to people who are on the ground activists everywhere, the Nakab, Hebron, Jerusalem, Jalil in the north, everywhere, Jaffa, Haifa, the message is unanimous. There is no, people always say, oh, Palestinians are fragmented, they don't know what they want. It's nonsense. Everybody wants to get up in the morning, live in a free country, take their kids to the beach when they want to, not have to see soldiers, not have to worry about the Israeli secret police running their lives, be able to talk about their history, teach their poetry as they wish. Everybody wants that. And everybody that I talk to, which is a lot of people, realizes that cannot be realized within a Zionist state. Now, BDS and the Palestinian resistance, the different forms of Palestinian resistance, are gaining ground. Not as fast as we'd like to, but they are gaining ground. And the state of Israel, with all of its nuclear weapons and its connections in the Gulf and its alliances with America, is actually crumbling. I'll give you 3 examples. The three flagships, if you will, of the Zionist project was the healthcare system, the education, and the military. The healthcare system is bankrupt. It's falling apart. Prices are extremely high. Hadassah, which was the flagship of the Israeli healthcare system, is bankrupt. Doctors, nurses are running away as fast as they can. It's bankrupt. It's not even remotely as good as it used to be. The education system is collapsing. You look at what students are studying in high school today compared to what I went to high school, which wasn't great, but it's pitiful. University fees have gone up. The boycotting of Israeli academics, the academic and cultural boycott, is hurting the Israeli academic world very badly. There was a program, one of several programs on the Israeli television about the BDS, and in one of the programs they had all the presidents of all the Israeli universities. And they said, we cannot get a grant, we cannot collaborate with other universities. The cases in which they can collaborate are few and far between. And this is going back a few years ago. The Israeli military cannot, if they had to face an army, they would be wiped out. All these generals that we see today, they've never had to face another army. They've got medals as though they've been to battles and wars. It's nothing. It's bombing Gaza. It's shooting children with rocks. None of them. They are terrified that one day they might have to face Hezbollah. Not to mention a war with Iran. Forget that. I think there's no way they would ever allow that to happen. It's an army that is completely empty. In Hebrew, there's a term, a chocolate army, an army of chocolate, soldiers of chocolate. They're incapable. They haven't fought. They're terrible. And never mind the corruption. Every other day, there's a story of a general here or a general there that's being suspended or thrown out because of sex or corruption or whatever. So these were the flagships. And there are the Israeli police is corrupt. The Israeli police force has been corrupt for a very long time. They haven't been able to find an Israeli police chief from within the police department, because in order to become a police chief, they have to go through an ethics committee and they know none of them can pass the ethics committee. So they always end up bringing somebody from the outside, and now it's been a couple of years, and there is no police chief. You know, the state is crumbling. It's falling apart. It's got the facade of being strong and vibrant, but it's not. Add to that 2.5 million in the Gaza Strip, which is a 30-minute drive from Tel Aviv. No electricity. Hospitals can't function because of electricity. Medicine can't be kept in a cooler because there's no electricity. You know what I'm saying? How can you have a state? How can you sustain a state when you've got 2 million people living with no clean water and no electricity and no access to medical care? And like I said, hundreds of thousands in the Nakab Desert who are Israeli citizens who have no access to services as well. The entire thing is collapsing. So I think the collapse, or the peaceful dismantlement, if you will, of this entity is much closer than what most of us probably imagine. And I always remind people, if you sat in a room in 1988 and told people that by 1994 Nelson Mandela would be president of South Africa, they'd laugh at you. And so once it starts, it happens very quickly. So I am in the longer term, I do see the light at the end of the tunnel.
Just to add one wild card to this equation, as everyone can tell by my accent, I'm from the United States, the great benefactor of Israel. Now, what's been happening in the United States since Trump assumed the presidency is that the liberals, the American liberals, be they Jewish, Christian, or atheist, that always supported Israel. Now, obviously, they are no friends of Trump's, but Trump's alignment with the Israeli government and the increasing lack of any pretense about the racism of the Israeli state are making the American liberals very uncomfortable. So there is now this dichotomy of liberals either, they always blame everything on the Israeli right. They say, well, the state itself used to be fine, but it's just the right that has now turned it into this entity that we're not comfortable with. But this break is increasing, and if, as unfortunately is all too possible, if Trump is reelected at the end of next year, so we have 4 more years of giving into every worst thing that the Israeli government wants to do, this will increase discomfort in the United States with supporting Zionism.
Could I just add a little comment to what Miko said before? I was surprised actually when you said the Israeli medical system is in trouble. And that's obviously why, if you think about it, that one of our Tory ministers, Priti Patel, very generously decided to give our money to Israel to help the medical system. We're suffering austerity, but she's giving money, or she wants to give money, to the Israeli medical system. Incredible. Anybody else would like a question? This gentleman?
Well, that's a question. Essentially, my name is John Timon. I'm a supporter of the campaign for Palestine and lots of campaigns. We do this magazine, which you find over there, The Palestinian, and we're trying to incorporate in that magazine all of the causes, all of the campaigns and so on. But a few years ago in Paris, we had a similar kind of discussion to this one, and it was led by Professor Bassam, Australian guy, and he had done a matrix of the campaigns and so on. And he was saying, as silly as it may sound, he said, but I think football is probably going to be the key to this thing here. And he said, because of the way that it's organised, every single country, every area, every landmass, every school, everywhere plays football. So it's a universal game. The only possible thing that's universally organised outside of rain, in fact, he says it gets to more places than rain does, football does. And he said, if you're organised around that, he said, you've got probably a key to this whole thing. And the key is in what FIFA does itself, if somebody is expelled, and only one country has been expelled, and that is South Africa for apartheid, and other countries for far, far less things. Zimbabwe was expelled because they owed £60,000 or something, and they were expelled. But that Israel has done lots and lots of other things and not been expelled yet. And you're saying that what happens is that when FIFA expel a country, then they are obliged to write out to every association in the whole world. And each association has got to write to all its football clubs, all its colleges, all its schools and universities, warning everybody that you must not play football with apartheid. And these children were getting those letters. That was 1976, July the 16th, 76, when they were expelled. By the time it came around to November, Christmas, all the children around the world simultaneously were getting a letter saying, you must not play football with apartheid. Not only that, but you must not have any sporting contact with the apartheid state. And these children were coming home just before Christmas and saying, Dad, how come I got this letter? This is happening out simultaneously around the world, getting this letter saying, I cannot play football with the apartheid state, yet you can sell them guns and weapons and so on and so forth. The following year, those students from the university were qualified going into industry, law and sciences and so on and so forth, and been to the universities and saying, look, last year I got this letter, this is what it said and so on. And so suddenly you had the whole world at one particular time, and that's about the late 1970s, yeah? And that was the beginning of the tumbling of apartheid. And Mike is quite right. I mean, Miko's quite right. I mean, you don't have to be violent, you don't have to use excessive language, you just have to say, we expel them, and it's peaceful. Nobody gets hurt at all. Nobody even gets insulted, except the pride of apartheid is what gets expelled. And that is why I ask people here, just to tell this story to anybody else who's interested in apartheid. They're not interested in football. It doesn't matter whether you're interested in football. It's interested in the campaign as the organisation in the world who actually has got the ability to expel somebody. And it's only disgrace, but it was the beginning of the end of apartheid in South Africa, and it can be the end of apartheid in Israel as well, I think, peacefully done.
All right.
Ronaldo, I mean, who's considered, what, number 1 or number 2 in the world, he was in a match and he refused to exchange his shirt with the opposite, the Israeli, he's opposite in the Israeli team. Now that has incredible impact. That goes all over the world, doesn't it? I mean, you know.
And he also donated to Gaza. He's been a very great supporter of Palestine. Ronaldo's been a good supporter of Palestine.
When he was on the microphone of the Israeli news service, and he said, will you give us a quote? He said, yeah.
Sorry, so I've got another question. I'm from Edinburgh, and for 6 months now we've been trying to twin with Gaza. Twin the city with Gaza, because we created Balfour. Balfour's from Edinburgh, we created the mess. We can try and sort it out. And of course this terrifies the councillors. And one thing that terrifies them most is the word Hamas. So I can't get the Palestine Solidarity Campaign in Edinburgh to support our bid because Hamas might be involved. Oh, we can't touch terrorists.
Wait, how is Hamas involved?
Because Hamas is the government of Gaza. So if we are twinning Edinburgh with Gaza, there might be some Hamas connection. This is the argument we get from PSC in Scotland. Might be involved in Hamas. Hamas are terrorists. So the fact that Hamas were made terrorists...
But they're not. They were taken off the list.
Well, that was only recently, yeah. I mean, it was only about a month ago, but then it's not completely off the list because it was in Luxembourg. A Luxembourg court a few weeks ago said, you know, Hamas aren't terrorists, but it's not been accepted by the UK. But I'm curious to know, firstly, do you think Hamas are an obstacle? I think they're freedom fighters to me, but they're always held up by Israel as like, you know, we give them an inch, those Hamas guys are going to come and kill us all. And this obviously is the narrative of fear that they prey on. And as long as they can keep people frightened, they can keep doing what they want. And I'm interested to know if you think Hamas can move the solution forward, because as we've heard, the Palestinian Authority, I think, is collaborated with the occupying forces.
So do you succeed in the twin sister or not?
So Hamas hasn't. Hamas, in a way, is still representing, you know, militant Palestine. You know, we want our homes back. You know, this is our right. This is our country. They haven't compromised. Do you think they can work with the BDS movement to move things forward? Because that seems to me, people seem to use Hamas as an excuse not to help.
So did this twin sister thing work or not work?
Well, still working on it.
Oh, I see.
It's taken another 6 months. I doubt we get it. But,
First of all, Hamas is not just the government of the Gaza Strip. Legally, Hamas is the government of the entire Palestinian area. In February 2006, the Palestinians were given a choice. You can vote for collaborators, what we call a Palestinian Authority, or you can vote for this bunch, well, maybe they're a bit crazy, but they're not collaborators. So the choice was obvious. I don't think very many Palestinians who voted for Hamas really wanted that sort of a government, but given the choice, yeah, it was obvious. We'd rather have people who are a bit more fanatical than we'd like in certain respects, rather than vote for collaborators. Now, they won the election throughout Palestine, not just Gaza. It's the government under Abbas, this other Palestinian authority in the West Bank, that is the illegal government by law, because Hamas won the entire election. Now, any group that actually opposes Israel, unlike the PA of the West Bank, any group that actually opposes Israel is going to be portrayed as this terrorist group, by definition. Now, I'm personally not a fan of Hamas. I think the Palestinians deserve something much better. But that is the legal government in the Gaza Strip, and if they are terrorists, what on earth do we call the Israeli government?
It is really strange that PSC should position themselves in a position of judging. I mean, if you support Palestinian rights, you shouldn't dictate to the Palestinians who they elect, who they support, who they wish to be their representatives. The moment people on the outside who sympathize with the Palestinians start dictating to the Palestinians, that really ends their cause. It defeats the purpose. I don't know why in Edinburgh they do this. I mean, PSC in London, we cooperate together. I mean, I'm considered to be close to Hamas. It's no secret. I've never been a member of Hamas, but Hamas officials are all my friends. We grew up together. I went to school with Khalid Mishal, for instance, etc. I know Hania very well. Whenever I visited Gaza, I visited him. But it's up to us Palestinians to decide on these issues. I suspect that sometimes the PLO or the Palestinian Authority has a hand in this, because they probably try to influence certain groups that want to help the Palestinians. I would advise anybody who sympathizes with the Palestinians not to be obliged to receive instructions from Hamas or from Fatah or from anybody else. The cause is very clear. You know what is needed in Palestine. BDS is the best probably way of serving the Palestinian cause. And twinning Edinburgh with Gaza helps the Palestinians in general. It's not going to send rockets to Hamas. And therefore their argument is really invalid. It's unacceptable.
Earlier about people from this country going to Palestine, particularly to the West Bank. Well, I've been 3 times to Palestine, twice to the West Bank, but last year I went to and stayed in Nazareth with Martin Linton's Travel to Palestine group. He organises overtly political tours, and we went back some very good Palestinian guides, particularly in Haifa and in Jaffa. The other thing, something that confuses me considerably is and I just wonder if you think that it's part of the Israeli state's kind of ploy, is the complications of the citizenship and residence rights in the different areas, and who can vote and who can And does that not make people here kind of fall back on the two-state solution because it just sounds very simple? So,
Yeah, I think what you said is very clear. The complex bureaucracy that Israel has imposed on Palestinians who live in different parts of the country is precisely, first of all, that's precisely why we call it an apartheid regime, but it also helps them to control and to pretend like there is not a single Palestinian nation. So you've got the Palestinians who are the Arabs of Israel, who have citizenship. You've got the Palestinians of Jerusalem, who only have a residence ID. You know, I'm from Jerusalem. Had I been a Palestinian, I would have lost my ID. But I can go back, and I'm an Israeli citizen. I can live there. I can I can do whatever I want. I can go back and forth. If I was a Palestinian, because I have a second passport, I would have lost my ID. Now, Palestinian families in Jerusalem, some of them go back to the days of Salah ad-Din, 1,000 years back. You know, I don't have that kind of heritage in Jerusalem, not even remotely. But that's the reality. And then you've got the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, and of course, the more complex Israel keeps it, the more difficult it is to understand, the happier Israel is, because the harder it is for people to wrap their head around it and say, well, what's the solution going to be? That's precisely the ploy. That's exactly what it's for, to make it complicated. And it makes it complicated for Palestinians, and it makes it difficult for Palestinians in Haifa to talk to their, or in other parts of 1948, to talk to their families who live just on the opposite side of this imaginary line they had nothing to do with drawing, which used to be called the Green Line. So absolutely, this is definitely part of the ploy. This is why it's there, absolutely.
Right, well, we've got the venue until 5 o'clock, so we've got 15 minutes.
I'd like to ask the panel about their vision for the future. I know that it's been discussed, but in a way that what would your optimum future be? I know in light of events, you know, how would you expect like the next step on a roadmap that would suit your vision of the future?
And the creation of a situation where human beings are equal, and where there is one law that applies to all. That's the ambition. When, we don't know. How, we don't know. But that's the vision. Yes.
No vision? I think that, I agree. I think the South Africa model is a good model. I think that hopefully if we do our job, Israel is kicked out of FIFA, and I agree with you 1,000%. I've been thinking and saying that myself. I think kicking Israel out of FIFA, kicking Israel out of the Olympics is incredibly important because it has this enormous ripple effect. There will be an Israeli prime minister who will step up to the podium one day, like President de Klerk did, and announce freeing of the political prisoners and legitimizing what is now illegitimate political movements, political parties, and calling for a one-person, one-vote election. After which there will be a parliament that represents the people and a government that represents the people, and that is the path. And again, just to be absolutely clear, I think once we do get to that point where there is a parliament that was voted for by the people, and there is an executive branch that represents the people, that's when we start solving the problems. That's when we start dealing with how do we allow the refugees to return? How do we pay restitution? How do we start solving all the problems? That is really just the ground level. That's the first thing that needs to be done that will allow the two sides to finally resolve these issues.
One comment to add to the football aspect. By training, I'm a classical musician. I'm a violinist. Now, the classical music world is filled with cowards when it comes to doing anything proactive, anything regarding taking any stand on human rights. The popular music field is, if not perfect, is much better. We have no equivalent to, say, the Roger Waters. Now, to give you one example, I'm sorry? Nigel Kennedy, yes, he's the only one, but he's a bit of an odd case. He's not the typical classical music world. And even he has his limits to how far he'll go. To give you an example, in 2011, in September, when the Israel Philharmonic came to the BBC Proms, there was a letter published in The Independent objecting to the invitation of them when Palestinian musicians are under this apartheid regime and do not have the same rights. Among the signatories were 4 members of the London Philharmonic Orchestra, one of them my partner, Nancy Elan. The 4 of them were vilified and suspended without pay for 7 months. And to this day are still looked down upon by many people, and they have been under a gag order. They have been denied even the ability to tell their side of the story, otherwise they will lose their jobs. Now this is what people in the classical music world are afraid of. But famous people should not have to fear that. If you're one of the really household names in the classical music world, you have no excuses. You can say, I will not go to Israel, I will not play in an apartheid regime, and you will not lose your career. And I think that it's important, with the football analogy, I think it's important that when famous classical Western musicians go to Israel, they need to hear from you. One could make excuses for people who have to put food on the table, and they will be put out of business if they do that. But famous classical musicians are at fault.
There's one thing I've realised over the last year about campaigning, which is the enormous influence Britain has in Israel. I was never really aware of it. The more I study about it, the more I realise that because Britain created this place, public opinion in Britain seems to affect folk living in Israel massively. And my idea would be that we can make our views known, we can twin more cities, we can speak out against Zionism, and that will filter through in Israel, because the more people here that complain about Zionism, the more people in Israel might begin to question what they think.
And if they can't play football, and if they can't go overseas, and the Israeli Philharmonic can't perform, that is going to get Israelis start thinking. These are exactly the kinds of things that will make them, that will force them to reflect. Yeah. All right, thank you. All right.
Could I just wind it up by saying that this is a charity event, and obviously not as many people here as we hope, because Jeremy Corbyn has stymied us again. So on your way out, if you could make a donation of whatever you can afford, we'd very much appreciate it, and it will every bit of it will go to Hebron, to the Youth Against Settlements. Thanks very much.